This is Moses Sirigar with Adventures in Sci-Fi Publishing. I'm sitting with John Jarrold at the World Fantasy Convention 2011 in San Diego. We're trying something a little different. We have the camera on John, so this is probably, if it turns out okay, this will be something you can either listen to or watch. So thank you so much for sitting with me. It's really an honor to be with you today.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Yep, thank you. I was reading some of the things that you've been involved with, and the list of big names in science fiction and fantasy was epic, certainly. And in case some people don't know who you are, you've worked, and let me pull up a note I have here about your background, because you came from publishing initially. You, between 1988 and 2002, ran 3 science fiction and fantasy imprints.
Yep.
Orbit at McDonald Futura.
Yes.
Legend at Random House UK.
Yep.
And Earthlight at Simon & Schuster UK. So along that time you worked with Ian M. Banks, Greg Bear, David Brin, Ray Bradbury, Terry Brooks, David Gemmell. The names go on, and they go down to people like Robert Jordan and Guy Gavriel Kay and Michael Moorcock, Tad Williams. So this is so it's really an honor to sit with a giant.
No, not at all, not at all. It was my pleasure to work with all these people. I was a science fiction fan since I was 14. Started going to conventions when I was 19, so I did that for 15 years before I got into publishing. Knew a lot of the authors through that. People like Rob Holdstock and Ian Banks were friends before I became a publisher and became their editor at various points.
Wow.
So that made life a lot easiasier for them as well, because there wasn't this black hole called John Jarrold who was suddenly their editor. We'd drunk a few together.
Wow, wow. I'm probably going to ask you to just like indulge us as often as you'd like with stories of any of these people, any of these times. I'd love to hear them, and our listeners would love to hear them. So do you have one off the top of your head that would be fun to share?
Well, the first time I met Ian Banks, Ian's first convention was Mexicon 2 in February 1986 in England. And he had partially gone there because he knew Bill Gibson was going to be there. And Bill had partially gone because he knew Ian was going to be there, and they loved each other's work. I was doing a fanzine at the time, it was before I was in publishing, and Bill used to get my fanzine every 6 months and had replied. So this was the first time I met him. And I walked through the convention and saw this guy laying on the floor with a pint of beer on his chest. And I thought I recognised him, leaned over and said, "Didn't you used to be Ian Banks?" And he looked up at me, opened one eye and said, "I think so." And that was how we met. And 2 years later I became his science fiction editor. And we were close friends by then.
Wow.
So much of it is about drinking and having fun.
Wow. So I was reading, you also worked with Robert Jordan.
Yes.
Were you the acquiring editor for the Wheel of Time?
Yeah. At the end of 1988, the advanced reading copies came through from touring the US. And I read it and thought, this is the best epic fantasy I've read for ages. It involved me totally.
Wow.
So I was lucky enough to do a deal for that and for the second book and for the third book. So I was the original UK acquiring editor.
Wow.
I met Jim Rigney in 1989, and we got on very, very well. And the last time I saw him was in Montreal, the World Fantasy Convention there in 2001. And every time I saw him, we just sat down and chatted as friends. I think so much of it is you don't just deal with people as business relationships. The majority of authors I've dealt with, both as an editor and an agent, are good friends. I mean, people like John Corney Grimwood, who's here. I published John for Earthlight, and he's a very, very close friend. And I think that's what it's about. It's about relationships as much as anything.
Yeah, I was reading up on you before the interview, and I went to, I don't know if you know about Absolute Right, it's a website, and they have a forum for background checks on agents and publishers and things like that. So I was reading your list there, and there was just a long list of people talking about what an incredibly nice guy you are, and how they would love to work with you, and that sort of thing. So, and that's a forum where if you're not likable, that people are supposed to say it.
Quite right too.
Right, exactly. So you were an editor. Since we just mentioned Robert Jordan, any fun Robert Jordan anecdotes?
I think that when I met him and his wife, who of course was also an editor at Tor, as Jordan was before he started writing, because they had that background, it made my life much easier, because they understood how publishing worked. With new authors, sometimes there are unreal expectations. and they think that they're going to go on a 3-month tour, signing tour, when nobody's interested in you when you're a new author. You've got to prove it. The public will love you. And I think the thing with Jim Rigney was always what a consummate professional he was. How easy he made one's life. And the fact that we just had great long conversations over a number of years. There's no sort of one story I can come up with like the Ian Banks story, but yeah, always fun to be with, absolute professional.
Now, about your work, so you were an acquiring editor, you were in that role for quite some time, and you are an agent currently.
Yes.
So how long have you been agenting?
I left full-time publishing in 2002, became a freelance editor, which is what I assumed I would be doing. And then in 2004, authors started coming to me and saying, have you considered being an agent? If so, would you be my agent? And I thought about it, didn't do it straight away, and started up the agency in the summer of 2004. Since when I've taken on roughly 40 clients, I've turned down over 8,000 people who've asked me to be their agent.
Wow.
I see 30 books a week. I've taken on 3 clients this year.
Wow.
And here we are on the cusp of November. If you don't think wow, you think no. Because it is difficult to get new authors published. It can be done. If I, as one agent, got 15 deals with debut novelists in the last 4 years, of course publishers want debut novelists. But they have to be outstanding. Being good is nowhere near good enough.
And we were discussing earlier some of the common problems you see in manuscripts over and over. What do those look like?
Point of view. Basically, you want to stick with one point of view through a scene. You don't want to head hop, and you don't want to tell from the outside, because both of those are less involving than being in one character's head all the time. Because we're dealing with science fiction and fantasy, this is not the world we know. This is not the world we see outside our door. So you, as the author, you have to explain that, not in info dumps, but within point of view thoughts and dialogue. A lot of authors don't do that, but they detail the world to the nth degree. So you know what colour that leaf is, but you don't know the background to the world or the country or who rules it. And it's finding out what you need to tell the reader, when you need to tell them, and equally what you don't need to tell them. That's such a learning process for authors in this area.
So it's sort of a generic question, but how do you like agenting versus being an editor?
One of the great things about this is I run my own business. I don't report to anybody else. I do what I do. And if I get it right, I make some money, and if I get it wrong, I don't make some money. So it concentrates the mind. With publishing being very corporate now, you're often not simply answering to a CEO or a managing director. You've got to get the sales director on the side and the marketing director and all the others, most of whom don't read books. And they will try and tell you what to publish. And I got fed up with that in the last few years. I have to say, both at Orbit and Random House, and to begin with at Simon & Schuster, I had a great time. The last year or so at Simon & Schuster wasn't a lot of fun. But that's a common experience with a lot of editors over the last decade. So yeah, I love being in charge of what I do. I wouldn't want to answer to anybody else again.
You're an agent, you're based in the UK?
Yeah.
Are your clients are typically in the UK?
About 90% of them. But in the US, I look after Robert V.S. Reddick, Red Wolf Conspiracy, Ian Cameron Esselmont, the second of the Malaz authors, together with Steve Erickson. I have authors in Australia, Rowena Corey Daniels, Rurik Davidson, who's going to be published by Tor next year in the US, and Dirk Strasser, who's won more awards than you could shake a stick at in Australian writing. And again, the great pleasure of this is because one does it all by email, it doesn't matter where the author is any more than it matters where I am. You don't have to be in London anymore if you're a UK agent, because you basically deal with the editors through email. And I get 150 emails a day. But these days, I only get 3 phone calls a week. So it's all email.
Wow. Is there anyone else on your staff, or are there any other agents in your stable?
No. Basically, I have a contracts associate who ran contracts departments in London Publishing for 20 years. So when we do a first deal with a publisher, she and I will both go through the contract, and we'll do the negotiation of the final contract. And then for film and TV, I deal with the Gotham Group in Los Angeles. They are both working on that side and also producers, so they know the entire background of film and TV. And we recently just did a deal for an author called Adam Neville, for film rights with his novel The Ritual, which is being published over here by St Martin's Press next year. And it's great because, you know, that is not my speciality. I don't do anything outside SF fantasy and horror because that's my special area. I don't do mysteries, I don't do horror, don't do thrillers, because I don't know that market in the way I know this market. Wouldn't be fair to the authors, wouldn't be fair to me.
Are you actively involved with your clients selling world rights and doing with that as well?
Yeah, basically, in UK publishing now, most managing directors are saying, if you can't bring me rights, don't bring me a new author. So the majority of those authors, world rights deals in the UK, and in some cases now between 10 and 15 deals around the world. It involves the entire company in publishing that author, so it isn't just the UK sales force and the editor. It means that the company makes some money out of it, the author is making lots of money out of it. 5 of my authors made 5-figure royalty checks, either before they were published in the UK or within 6 months of being published in the UK because of overseas deals. And 4 of those authors are now on their 4th 5-figure royalty sum.
Oh, that's great. So pardon my ignorance on this question, but so you're representing someone, do you typically take them to UK publishers first or US publishers first, or does it vary?
It varies completely. I do a lot of talks for writers' groups, and one of the phrases I use most often is, there are no absolutes in publishing. You're dealing with individuals, and you're dealing with individual situations. So in some cases, I will go to one specific publisher in London or New York if I think that this is really right for them and their taste, and say, look, you can have this for 3 weeks before I show it to anybody else. And if you come back to me within that time with a very, very good offer, then we might well not show it to somebody else. In some cases, I will go to everybody in London. In some cases, I'll go to everybody in London and everybody in New York. So it is case by case.
Okay. But it sounds like you maybe lean a little more towards UK publishers?
Yeah, because I know their backgrounds, and because I've known most of them for 15 to 20 years, we can talk very sensibly about that. But yeah, occasionally there will be a situation where I think somebody in New York at Tor or Berkeley or Dore or Del Rey, wherever, is the right person, and then I will go to them directly.
Okay. I saw you represent Mark Chair Newton as well? Yep, so he's a new guy you've picked up in recent years.
Yeah, well, Mark had already shown his first book to Peter Lavery at Pan Macmillan, and then came to me, and I thought, you know, he's a terrific writer, and it's very much about what he's writing. You know, there's no doubt you're going to be published, it's just which book. So we worked over 3 books, and it was the 3rd book, Knights of Vilgemore. They got the first major deal with Pan Macmillan in the UK, again, world rights, and they then sold US rights to Del Rey in the States. And that's been picked up in about 6 different territories around the world. And again, it was just great finding a new writer with an obvious voice, and an obvious deep enthusiasm. Because the other thing is, don't write purely and simply to make money, don't write purely and simply to be published. Write because you write, and I love your writing, because if you as the author don't love it, it comes through on the page, and nobody else will love it.
So David Gembel's another name that you've been connected with, right? What's your history with him?
Well, when I moved to Random House in 1992, David was already being published there and had been for 8 years. And I took over the Legend list, became his editor, and we both lived in Hastings, seaside town. So once a month I would go around to his house and we would drink a bottle of brandy and smoke about 60 cigarettes and talk about life and whatever else was going on with his books. And we got on very well. David took no rubbish from anybody. You know, he didn't suffer fools at all, let alone gladly. So we just talked very straightforwardly about stuff.
Wow.
I'm a standard South London boy. My dad was a docker. You know, I did not come from a posh family. And I think David appreciated that.
Wow.
That we weren't going to sit there and try and be posh.
Wow. Yeah, I'd heard a little bit along the grapevine that you're kind of a straight talker, you might say, you know, that you cut right to it. So I was initially a little bit intimidated to talk to you, but then as soon as I talked to you, you're like this, you know, very like cuddly guy, you know, like a fuzzy teddy bear, you know, it's like very easy. So.
Oh, thank you, thank you. No, I think the thing is, I'm allowed to say bullshit. Yeah.
Say again?
Bullshit. Can I say that?
Oh, yeah.
But I hate bullshit, basically. When I was at school, I was always good at précis, and I don't use 10 words where one will do. I think it's very important that you state things very straightforwardly, particularly for new authors, because you know they're nervous, they're learning. So if you can put it as straightforwardly as you can, that's good. I'm given to doing half-hour talks rather than hour talks, or 1 hour talks rather than 2 hour talks. I don't want to waste a word. I don't want to waste people's time. You get there, you say it, you answer the questions. That's incredibly important, because there will be so many things I take for granted that new authors won't know. Somebody actually asked me about double spacing. They said, do you mean between lines or words? Now, that would not have occurred to me. So anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, and I get on stage at these events, and I say, right, ask me anything you want about publishing.
Yeah.
Or agents, or publishers, whatever you like, or writing. And I'll tell you, and if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. So that's it, straightforward.
I saw Michael Moorcock, another
Yes.
name on your list of
Yes.
people you've been associated with. What's the history with him?
Well, I first met Mike in 1975. There was a series of lectures at a London lecture place called the ICA. And we all met in the pub beforehand, as one tends to do at these things. Mike was there with Tom Dish. And I was, just went up and shook hands and said, it was lovely to meet you. And then I took on 3 new Elric novels from him for
Wow.
Simon & Schuster. Well, we went out and had a wonderful lunch and talked about life. We're still in contact regularly. And it's a huge pleasure. You know, I first read Mike probably about 1968, 69, in the old Mayflower paperbacks of Elric and Hawkmoon and Coram Jarl and Earthside.
Yeah,
So to have gone through that when I was a teenager, to go through meeting Mike and then to go through publishing Mike, is wonderful. I'm incredibly lucky.
Wow. Yeah. His stories were some of the earliest influences on me as well,
Yeah.
so that's really neat. So you're an agent, but you're also a book doctor, right?
Yeah.
Right? So so people contact you sometimes and you will give editorial feedback.
Yes.
And so is that something you do increasingly more, increasingly less?
Interestingly, the last 12 months, it's been quite a lot more. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks on a 100,000 word novel, so you can't do too many a year. But equally, I love doing it. I mean, one of the great pleasures for me of working in publishing as an editor was editing books, working with authors, and sort of pointing things out, because it doesn't matter who the author is, you get to a point where you can't see the wood for the trees.
Yeah.
So, you know, being able to step back and say that, and say, you know, as a reader, I've got no idea how we got from A to B. But we did blah, blah. I said, but it's not on the page. You know, it's in your head. And all of those things. So yes, I love doing that. I also do that with all my new clients. So every first novel I send out is fully edited before it goes out, because you've really got to present the publisher now with something that's almost ready to publish.
Yeah.
Because it has to be shown to the sales director and the marketing director. They're not editors. So if they see something that's not ready, they'll say, you can't buy it. Now, as an editor, you know that there's work to do. And 15 years ago, you could do that. But now it has to be almost ready. So yes, I will edit anything I send out to within an inch of its life before it goes out.
Wow, wow. So you'll do, you said 3 to 4 weeks on a 100,000 word manuscript. And do you only do one at a time like that, or it just...
I try to stick to one. Sometimes, when I'm getting into the last week, and I know basically what I'm going to say on the script, because I run through 3 times. The third time is when I add all the editing to the script, all the editorial notes to the script, and write up the general notes. When I got to that point, I will sometimes start the first read on the next book, so that is coming into my head as well. Very often I'll download that to the Kindle and sit in bed at night and do the start of the first read.
Yeah, oh, that's great. So you're doing that for clients, it sounds like new clients in particular, but all your clients?
Yeah, once there's a deal, then I leave them alone, because it's between them and the editor. And as an editor myself, I would have hated it if the agent had tried to be involved in the editorial process at that point.
Right.
But so anybody who hasn't yet got a deal, any book I send out is fully edited. And I probably spend 70% of my time working with the agency and 30% of my time on the editing.
Okay. So even the established authors, you're going through the books like that before you send it?
If they don't have a deal yet.
Yes, yeah.
So there are, and sometimes it's the first book and sometimes it's the 5th or 6th book. You know, and again, it's something you explain to new authors, that just because I think this is a wonderful book, it doesn't mean you're going to get a deal, because it's subjective. We're not dealing with another can of baked beans. Every science fiction novel, every fantasy novel, every novel, any editor who sees it will have their own subjective take on it. And you have to be aware of that. You know, it's not an objective business, publishing. You look at the reviews on Amazon, And there are too many people on there who assume that their opinion is objective truth,
Right.
which is not true. Any book that is a bestseller will have people who hate it. And you'll see them on Amazon saying, I can't understand why this is a bestseller, I hate it.
Right.
Well, that just means you hate it. It doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
It isn't to your taste.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought for just a moment.
Sorry.
But no problem. So you have about 40 authors
Yes.
in your stable right now, and so far this year you've acquired 3
Yes.
more. So, but you're still actively looking for clients.
In as much as one knows there will always be turnover. I mean, I don't want many more than 40, to be honest.
Yeah.
Once you've got that deal, you can have a conversation with the publisher, make sure the publicity is being done right, make sure the cover is right, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
With the newer authors, obviously, it's more time intensive because you are doing the editorial work with them, because you are talking up front to publishers about what you're going to send out.
Ah.
With the 3 authors I've taken on this year, I've edited all their books.
Mm.
One arrived on the day before I came here, so I downloaded that to the Kindle.
Yeah.
Started reading it on the plane to the States.
Yeah.
The other 2 are coming in the next month,
Okay.
the revised editions. So I'll be looking at them before I send them out. But again, I've already been in touch with publishers to see what's going on that front. But yeah, I mean, if you see something that makes you go, wow, then you want to be involved.
Yeah.
But you know that 99% of the time, the stuff that's sent in is not going to make you go, wow.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm concerned, it's worth reading hundreds of books that don't make you go, well, to see the one that does. I don't ever close for submissions. I know agents do. They'll tell you, we're only open in March and December, whatever. I can't see the point in doing that. I don't want to miss that one book that makes me go, wow. And there are so few. It's like Christmas morning when that happens. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to see that book.
Mm-hmm. What is it like to sell books now as an agent versus 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
I think we're very lucky in science fiction and fantasy. It doesn't go away. Speaking to general agents, they have found it far more difficult in the last 3-4 years. I went from 18 books by agency clients in 2009 to 36 books by agency clients in 2010
Wow.
to 45 books this year.
Wow. Books sold?
Books sold.
Wow.
Oh, sorry, I should say books being published.
Okay.
In London and
Okay.
New York by major publishers.
Okay.
So, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a bad time to be involved. You know that publishers are in a difficult time. You know that the editors are not taking on a huge number of new authors. Most editors might take on 2 debuts a year, but that was true 5 years ago, it was true 10 years ago. I think the thing is that certainly in the UK, editors had already sort of cut their cloth 10 years ago, before the recession or anything like that. And you have to go into a room as an editor and look the sales director in the eye and say, this is fantastic, not this is good.
Yeah.
Because they've got to go and do that to the book trade, where you sell 70% of your copies to the head offices in the book trade. So little of it now is done by sales reps. It's all done by one person from the sales department to one person at W.H. Smith's or Barnes & Noble or Waterstones or wherever.
So let's see. I wanted to mention the date in case anyone is watching this or listening.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But we're recording this October 29th, 2011
Yeah.
at World Fantasy. I did mention it was the World Fantasy Convention 2011. But is it true, and you may be in a very different situation, I don't know, is it true that advances are generally down considerably around publishing? I've heard some people say that.
I have not found that. They haven't gone up considerably. And you know that there's a sort of ballpark outside of something that's a preempt offer that takes it off the table. And again, I explain that to authors, that they're not going to get £1 million or $1 million. But if we can do a sensible book, 3-book deal, say, for world rights, it will be somewhere in this area. And that they shouldn't give up the day job until they've got 4 or 5 books out there and they're all selling really, really well, and they're getting lots of money in royalties over a period of years. Because, publishers aren't there to pay you what you need to live. They're there to pay you what they think the book is worth. And I did that for 15 years, so I know exactly how it works. And I'll explain that to new authors.
Can you tell me some of the more interesting names that you've actually acquired when you were an editor, when you were picking people out of the slush pile or the agented submissions? Or
It's pretty much agented, but
Okay.
Ken MacLeod. I took on Ken MacLeod's first 4 novels. remember a scene in Ghostbusters where Janine, the secretary, takes a phone call, puts the phone down, and then shouts, "We got one!" That was how I felt when I read the first page of Ken MacLeod's Star Fraction, his debut novel. It's that cliche. I did stay up until 3 o'clock finishing it in the morning, the day it arrived. I went back into the office the next morning, went into the cells at the managing director's office and pounded on the table and said, "Right, we're going to publish this. Don't give me any rubbish, we're going to publish it." Did a 2-book deal the next week. And there are books you publish that you think, yeah, that's a good deal. There are books you publish you're proud of. Mm-hmm. Ken is certainly one of them. Maggie Fury, with her first novel, Orion, did a 3-book deal there. Rob Holdstock. Now, Rob had been a friend since the early 70s. And I published his horror novel, The Fetch, with Orbit in 1990. And then we were talking a decade later, and he'd come up with the Merlin Codex. And I was lucky enough to acquire the first 2 books and then the 3rd book, in that Celtica was the first one. And very, very proud of that. John Courtney Grimwood. John's first 2 books have been published fairly badly in the UK. And I was able to buy back the 3rd and 4th books in that contract and publish them at Earthlight at Simon & Schuster and sell many, many more copies than the first 2 books had done. After I left publishing, I used to run the BSFA Awards ceremony at the Easter SF Convention. And the year after that, I was able to present John with the award for the best science fiction novel of the year, which was one that I'd commissioned and edited.
Wow.
Fellaini, and he's a wonderful writer. You look over the years at what you do, and it's always about the writing. It's not always about the writer. It's got to be about the writing, because when somebody runs into a bookshop on a wet Wednesday afternoon to buy something to read on the train, they don't care about the writer. What they care about is it a good book?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking of. I'm very lucky because in SF and fantasy, most of the authors have far less ego than general publishing. Many, many of the authors that I've published over the years have become and remain personal friends. And I feel very lucky about that as well. So yeah, I mean, it's just been an amazing time. And you look at the first novels, you look at the authors who took over, people like Terry Brooks. I was lucky enough to publish Terry at all 3 of the companies I was with. And Terry is one of the sweetest men I've ever met. I was in 1996, the World Convention was in Anaheim, in California. And I said, "Yeah, you're going to be there, Tel?" And he said, No, but do you want to come and stay afterwards? Now he lives in Seattle at that time, so I thought it would be nice. He said, "Oh, John, we're not going to be in Seattle, we're in the other place." "What's the other place, Terry?" "Oh, John, I'm really sorry. You've got to come to Hawaii." Oh, damn. So I was able to spend a few days in Hawaii with Terry and his wife, Judy.
He lives on Maui, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, sorry, on the Big Island.
Does he?
Yeah.
Okay, because I think he was at maybe the Maui Writers Conference.
He does that.
Okay.
He used to do it every year. I don't know if he still does.
Okay, I think they canceled that conference.
Right.
I lived on Maui when they were doing it.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing his name on there.
Yes. So he used to do that a lot. And yes, he was already with Orbit when I joined there. And we did a 4-book deal there as I was leaving. Now, of course, he was with Random House in the States. And not through my usage, but through Random House. That deal was transferred to Random House UK, which is where I was going. So we did those books at Random UK on the Legend imprint. And then after I left there and went to Simon & Schuster, I was able to do a 6-book deal for Terry to bring him to Simon & Schuster. So I was very lucky that I published Terry at all 3 places. I published Arthur C. Clarke and Rama 2 and other stuff. And I'd read Arthur since I was a teenager. So that was fabulous.
Wow.
Did Robert Heinlein's biography written by his wife. And yeah, there's just been a lot of stuff over the years. I was very lucky. People like Orson Scott Card, Greg Bear, Greg and Astrid, who are here, personal friends, great friends, wonderful writer, Greg. Greg Benford, David Brin. I published several books by David Brin when I was at Orbit.
I saw Tad Williams on your list.
Tad, yeah, he was already with Random House when I went there. But we did, the Dragonbone Chair had been published. I published Green Angel Tower in 1993, I think. I could be wrong there. And then did the deal for the Otherland series at Random House. I've just been around a long time.
Speaking of which, I was going to hit you up for another old war story, or,
Yeah.
or just actually a fun story. You said you attended one of your first cons when you were around 21.
Yeah.
So go all the way back in the time machine to you at some of these cons in your early 20s.
Yeah.
Maybe anything fun that you remember from one of those cons?
Well, I mean, I started when I was 19, 1973, East SF Convention in Bristol. And on the Sunday night, I came out of the con hall about 1 o'clock, back into the bar, 24-hour bar. And Brian Aldiss and James Blish were sitting in the bar with Peter Nichols, who later did the SF Encyclopedia. Now, I'd met Peter at the London SF meeting, and he called me over, and we just sat there until dawn, talking about life and drinking. I'm 19 years old.